The cold in the lower passage of Holloway Court had a taste to it. Damaris had noticed that in her first week and had never stopped noticing it. Stone and lamp oil and the ghost of yesterday's mutton. She woke at 4:30. She always woke before the bell. She lay a moment in the dark and listened to Bess breathing in the other bed. And then she got up and dressed in the cold and went down. The kitchen fire was her work. She raked the ash into the pail, or she laid the wood. She struck the flint and blew until her chest ached, and the flame took hold. Her knuckles split every winter and healed every spring and split again. She had been 3 months in the house. 3 months was long enough to learn the rules. Keep to the wall when the family passed. Do not speak unless you are spoken to. Do not look at a face above your own for longer than it takes to see whether that face wants something of you. Damaris had learned these things quickly. Mrs. Thurkell had said so once, in the way she said everything, without warmth and without unkindness. She carried water. She scoured the range. She set the copper to heat. Outside the high window, the sky went from black to the color of dirty linen, and the rooks came off the elms in the park and made their noise and settled again. She liked this hour. Nobody wanted anything of her yet. She could think her own thoughts, and no one in the world could tell that she was thinking them. She was 19 years old. Nobody in that house knew her true name. It was in the second week of November that the tray became hers. Bess took a fever in the night. Mrs. Thurkell came down at 6 with her keys on her belt and her face already set for the day, and said, "You will take the morning tray up. You will go up at 7:15, Mrs. Thurkell said. Not at 10 past. Not at 20 past. 1/4 past. You will knock once. You will go in. You will set it on the side table and you will pour, and then you will leave, and you will not speak, and you will not linger, and you will not ask him anything at all." "Yes, Mrs. Thurkell, anything at all," said Mrs. Thurkell. The tray was already laid when Damaris came to it. The housekeeper had done it herself, before anyone else was awake, in an order Damaris would come to know as well as her own hands: the small silver pot, the hot water jug, the strainer. The sugar, though the sugar was never touched, the milk in the little jug with the chip on the lip. And 1 cup. Only 1, and it matched nothing else. On that tray, it was not Holloway porcelain. It was brown, a common brown, the sort of ware you would find on a shelf in any village. It sat there among the silver like a farm dog in a drawing room. Damaris looked at it a moment, then she took the tray up the back stairs. The morning room faced east. Somebody had lit the fire at 5, and it had settled into a good, steady heat. There were tall windows down one side, and the light came gray and wet across the park, and standing in that light with his back to the door was the Duke of Holloway. She had seen him 3 times in 3 months, always at a distance. She had never been in a room with him. He was not old. She had expected old. He was perhaps 35, black-coated, dark-haired, and he stood very still with his hands behind his back and did not turn. 1 cup, he said, as usual. Damaris set the tray on the side table. Her hands were steady, which surprised her, because nothing else about her was. She warmed the pot. She poured. The steam came up strong and good, and she carried the cup across the room and set it at the far end of the long table where nobody was sitting. "Thank you," said the Duke. He did not turn around. She went out and closed the door. At 8:30, she came back for the tray. The cup was where she had left it, full to within a finger of the rim. It was stone cold, and there was a skin across the top, and the light from the window lay on that skin in a dull, flat circle. He had not touched it. She carried it down and said nothing to anybody. The next morning he was at the window with his hands behind his back, and he said 1 cup as usual, and she poured it and set it at the empty place, and he said, "Thank you," and she went out. At 8:30 it was cold and skinned over. The morning after that it was the same. And the morning after that she began without deciding to count. By the end of the first week, she had carried up 7 cups and carried down 7, and not one had been moved so much as an inch. By the end of the second week, it was 14. She began to notice small things because there was nothing else to notice. That he was always there before her, never once behind. That the place at the end of the table was late every morning, though nobody ever sat at it. That he never asked for anything else at all. She asked Bess when she came back from her fever, in the dark of their room with the candle out. "Do not," said Bess. "Do not what? Do not ask about the cup." "Why?" Bess turned over. The bed frame creaked. "I have been here 2 years," she said, "and I have carried that tray up more mornings than I can count, and I have never once asked, and you should not either. But he never drinks it. I know he never drinks it. Then why does he order it?" "Go to sleep, Damaris." She tried Hollis, the second footman, who talked more than was good for him. Hollis laughed and said perhaps his Grace does not care for tea. Then he stopped laughing, and looked over his shoulder at the passage door, and said in a different voice, "I would not, though, truly, I would not." She tried Mrs. Thurkell once, only once. She said it lightly, with her eyes on the plate she was drying. "Mrs. Thurkell, does His Grace prefer his tea cool?" Mrs. Thurkell went on writing in the book in front of her. She did not look up. She did not answer. She finished the line and blotted it, and closed the book. And then she took her keys and went out, and the door did not slam, and somehow that was worse than if it had. Damaris did not ask again, but she watched. In the third week, she saw the thing she could not afterwards stop seeing. She had set the cup down and turned to go, and something made her glance back from the door. He had come away from the window. He was standing at the end of the table looking down at it, and as she watched, he laid 2 fingers against the side of the cup, lightly, the way you would test whether a child's forehead was hot. He held them there. 2 seconds. 3. Then he took his hand away and put it behind his back and looked at the window, and the cup sat where it was and went cold, as it always did. He touched it every morning. She began to look for it, and it was always there. 2 fingers against the side of the cup, and then nothing. He never lifted it. The washing of it was a separate business, and she learned that too. Everything else off that tray went to the scullery with the house china, not the cup. The cup went to the still room, washed by hand in water. Mrs. Thurkell drew herself, dried with a cloth kept for no other purpose, and set back on the 3rd shelf where nothing else stood. Mrs. Thurkell showed her how on a Tuesday, in silence, and made her do it while she watched. "Not with the others," she said. "Not ever with the others. Not in the pail. Not in the scullery. Here, by your own hand, and then back on that shelf." "Yes, Mrs. Thurkell." The housekeeper looked at her a long time. "There was a girl before Bess," she said. "Peg. A good worker and quick, and I liked her. She carried that tray a month, and one morning she thought she would be kind, and asked His Grace, in a small voice and meaning no harm, whether he would not like a fresh cup, as that one had gone cold. What did he say?" "He said nothing," said Mrs. Thurkell. "He looked at her and said nothing, and went out of the room, and by 4 o'clock that afternoon I had her wages counted, and her box on the cart. The fire ticked in the still room grate. "He is not a cruel man," said Mrs. Thurkell. "Understand me. He is not a cruel man. But there are things in this house that are not spoken of, and that is the first of them, and I will not lose another girl over it. I hear you." Mrs. Thurkell went out. Damaris stood alone in the still room with the cloth in her hand and the cup on the board before her, and for the first time in 3 months she was entirely still. Then she picked it up. It was heavier than it looked, because the base was thick. The glaze was worn pale along one side where a thumb had rubbed it for years. A hairline crack ran from the rim down towards the foot, stopped long ago with a small lead rivet gone dark with age. She knew that cup. She knew the weight of it. She knew the worn place, because it was the shape of a thumb that was not hers. She had carried that cup, filled, across a cold room 100 times before she was 12 years old, and set it down at a man's elbow, and been told she was a good girl, and gone away again. It had stood on her father's desk for 11 years. She did not drop it. She was proud of that afterwards, in a small, cold way, because it was the only thing she had done well that day. She set the cup down on the board. She folded the cloth. She put the cloth where it lived. She lifted the cup with both hands, which was not how it was meant to be lifted, and she carried it to the third shelf and set it down, and then she stood there with her hands flat on the shelf and her head down until she could hear the kitchen again. Then she went out and carried coals for 2 hours and did not think about anything at all. Her name was Damaris Merrow. Her father was Elias Merrow, and for 11 years he had been land steward to the Dukes of Halloway, first to the old Duke and then to the young one, and he had kept the rent books and the tithe books and the drainage accounts and the timber accounts in a hand so small and so even that men used to come from other estates to look at it. They had lived at Wren's Gate, which was the steward's house at the north edge of the park, half a mile from the great house through the beeches. The estate office was the front room. It had a low ceiling and a stone floor and one window that faced the wrong way, so that it was cold from October to April, and her father sat in it from 7 in the morning until the light went. He took his tea at 7:15. Always. Not 7, and not 1/2 past. Her mother said you could set the church by Elias Merrow's tea, and her father said that a man who is careless with small hours will be careless with large sums. And her mother said yes, Elias, and looked at Damaris, and made a face. The cup was his own. He had brought it with him when he came, and he would not use the house china, not because he was proud, but because he was the opposite of proud. "It is not mine," he said. "Why should I wear out what is not mine?" She warmed it for him. That was her work from the time she was 5 years old. "You warm the cup first," he said, "or the tea is cold before you have said good morning to it." So she warmed it with water from the kettle and poured the water away, and dried it, and carried it across the cold stone floor and set it down at his elbow. And he said, "Thank you, Damaris. You are a good girl," without looking up from the book. 100 times, 1,000. She did not know. It had been every morning of her life. Then, 4 years ago at Michaelmas, 340 pounds of collected rents did not reach the bank at Ledwich. Her father was 51 years old. He had never in his life been accused of anything. He went up to the great house on a Thursday morning to explain, and he took his books with him under his arm, and he was gone 4 hours, and when he came back he stood in the doorway of the estate office and did not take his hat off, and her mother said, "Elias," and he said, "We are to be out by Saturday." He was not charged. That was the thing Damaris could never make anybody understand afterwards. Nobody charged him. There was no trial and no constable and nothing written down, and that was worse, because a man who has been tried can be acquitted. Her father was simply dismissed and refused a character, and a steward without a character is a man who has stolen and been shown mercy, and every house in the county knew what that meant within a fortnight. They went to Ledwich and took 2 rooms over a chandler's shop in a lane that smelled of tallow. Her mother took in sewing. Damaris took in whatever there was. Her father wrote 17 letters in the first year, applying for places, and had 4 answers, and all 4 were no. In the second year, he stopped writing letters. He sat by the window. He was not ill in any way a doctor could name. He ate what he was given, and he answered when he was spoken to, and he said, "Please and thank you." And he did not read, and he did not go out, and he did not speak first ever about anything to anyone for 4 years. Her mother said, "He is only tired." Damaris knew better. She had watched a man be taken apart by 4 hours in a room and she had watched the pieces sit by a window for 4 years, and she had decided somewhere in that time, without ever saying it aloud even to herself, that she was going to go and look at the man who had done it, not to harm him. She was not a fool, and she was not violent. She only wanted to see his face. She wanted to know whether it was the face of somebody who had thought about it, or the face of somebody who had not. So in August she took her mother's name, which was Rowe, and she wrote to a house that had been shut up for a year after all of it, and had opened again with a new housekeeper and very nearly a new household, and nobody left in it who had ever seen her face, and she said she was 19 and strong and could do plain work. They took her in August. It was now the first week of December, and the man whose face she had come to look at had never once looked at her, and kept her father's cup on a shelf where nothing else was allowed to stand, and touched it every morning with 2 fingers, and let it go cold. She did not know what that meant. She found that she very badly wanted to. She carried the tray up the next morning at 7:15, and her hand shook so much that the strainer rattled on the pot, and he did not turn around, and she poured, and she went out. She did it again the morning after that. And the morning after that. It is a strange thing to hold an object you have known since you were a child and be unable to say so. She began to feel that the cup knew her. That was foolish. She knew it was foolish, and she felt it anyway. Every morning, in the 3 seconds between lifting it off the tray and setting it down at the empty place, twice she came close to speaking. The second time was on a Friday. She had set the cup down, and he had said, "Thank you," as he always said it. And then he had added, without turning, that it was a hard frost, and she was to tell Mrs. Thirkell the pump in the lower yard would want lagging. It was the first thing he had ever said to her that was not 1 cup as usual, or "thank you." 4 ordinary words about a pump, and her whole chest went tight. And she stood with the empty tray against her apron, and felt the question come up out of her, the way water comes up in a well. Whose cup is that? She had it in her mouth. She could taste the shape of it. And then she thought of Peg, and of a box on a cart at 4 o'clock, and of her mother in 2 rooms over a chandler's shop with her eyes going from the sewing. And she said, "Yes, Your Grace," and went out and closed the door and stood in the passage with her hand flat on the wall. The talk in the servants' hall came to her the way such talk always comes, sideways, on a wet afternoon, when there is nothing else to do. It was raining hard, the yard was a lake. Hollis was cleaning plate at the long table, and Bess was mending, and one of the kitchen girls was picking over lentils, and somebody said something about the morning room, and Hollis put down the fork he was holding. "I know," said Hollis. "You do not," said Bess. "I do. I had it from Ferrand, who had it from the old coachman before he went to Bath. Nobody asked, everybody waited. Hollis let them wait, because he was that sort of man. He was to be married," said Hollis. "Long ago, before he came into the title, a young lady of the county, and it was all arranged, and she died 3 weeks before the wedding of a fever, and she used to take her tea with him in that room every morning that she was here. That is who the cup is for. He orders it for her, and he cannot drink it, and he cannot stop ordering it." There was a silence at the table of the particular kind that means everybody is enjoying themselves. "That is very sad," said the kitchen girl. "It is the saddest thing in this house," said Hollis. Damaris sat with her hands in her lap and felt something in her chest go loose and then tighten again. It fitted. That was the trouble with it. It fitted so well that she wanted it to be true, because if it were true, then the cup on the shelf was somebody else's cup, and her father was still sitting by a window in Ledwich for no reason at all, and the world was simply cruel in the ordinary way, and not in the particular way. Then, Bess said without looking up from her mending, there was never any young lady. Hollis said, "Ferrand said." "Ferrand says a great deal," said Bess. "Mrs. Thirkell was housekeeper to his aunt before she came here, and I have heard her say plainly that his Grace was never engaged to anybody in his life, and that people who invent romances about their betters generally want something." Hollis went red and picked the fork up again. Damaris looked at the table. So that was the first answer she was given, and it lasted 4 days. On the 5th morning, she went up at 7:15, and the room was empty. The fire was lit. The place at the end of the table was laid. The gray light was coming in off the park exactly as it always did. But he was not at the window, and he was not anywhere, and for a moment she stood in the doorway with the tray in her hands and did not know what she was supposed to do. She had not been told what to do. She had been told 7:15, and knock once, and pour, and go. So she poured. She warmed the pot. She poured the tea. She carried the cup across the room and set it at the empty place. She stood there a moment longer than she should have, looking at it steaming gently in an empty room, in an empty house at the far end of a table nobody sat at. Then she went out. At 8:30 she came back for the tray, and the cup was gone. Not moved. Not drunk. Gone. The saucer was there and the cup was not, and there was a ring of damp on the wood where it had stood. She went down to the still room, and it was not on the shelf either. Damaris did her work that day badly. She dropped a scuttle. She was spoken to twice. At 9 o'clock that night, she took a candle and went along the passage to the still room, because she could not go up to bed without knowing, and she pushed the door with her shoulder because her hands were full and there was already a light inside. The Duke of Holloway was sitting on the stool at the still room board. He had his coat off. His shirt sleeves were turned back. There was a candle at his elbow and the cup in front of him on the board, and he was not doing anything with it. He was sitting with his forearms on the wood and his hands loose, and he was looking at it. Damaris stopped in the doorway. She should have gone. Every rule she had learned in 3 months said, go. Go now, go backwards, and quietly, and do not be seen. She had a candle in one hand and a cloth in the other, and she stood in the doorway of the still room at 9 o'clock at night looking at a duke in his shirt sleeves, and she did not move at all. He turned his head. For a moment neither of them said anything. Then he said, come in or go out. Do not stand in the door. She came in. She did not know why. She set her candle on the shelf because her hand was not steady enough to hold it. He looked at her for what felt like a long time. It was the first time in 4 months that he had looked at her. You bring the tray, he said. Yes, Your Grace. Since November, Your Grace. He nodded slowly, as if that were a fact he had been carrying about with him, and had now put down. What is your name? Roe, Your Grace. Your Christian name? Damaris. He did not react. There was no reason he should. He said it once, quietly, the way a man reads a word in a book, and then he looked back at the cup. I broke a rule of my own this morning, he said. I was not in the room. That has not happened in 4 years. I was called out to a barn that had gone over in the wind, and I did not think of it until I was halfway across the park. Damaris said nothing, and when I came back at 8:30, he said, it was there. Yes, Your Grace. You poured it. I was told 7:15. Nobody told me what to do if the room was empty. No, he said. Nobody did. He turned the cup a little on the board with one finger, an inch, and stopped. Then he said, why did you set it at that place? Because that is where it goes. I might have been anywhere in the room. There are 11 chairs at that table. May I say something, Your Grace? You may say one thing. That place is laid every morning, said Damaris. Mrs. Thurkell lays it herself before it is light. The linen is changed on Mondays, and the knife is set, and the glass is set, and nobody sits there, and nobody has sat there since I came into this house. It is not a chair, it is a place. He was quiet for a moment. That is more than one thing, he said. Yes, Your Grace. He did not smile. She thought that something in his face came very near it, and then thought better of it. Damaris looked at the cup, and afterwards she could never explain to herself why she said the next thing, except that she had spent 4 years being careful and had discovered that carefulness had saved nobody. "You should warm the cup first," she said, "before you pour. It is a thick base, and it takes the heat out of the tea, and by the time it is cool enough to drink, it is already cold. It should be warmed." The Duke of Holloway went absolutely still. She heard the fire in the kitchen 2 rooms away. She heard rain on the yard. "Who taught you that?" he said. His voice had not risen at all. That was somehow the frightening part. "Well." "My mother," said Damaris. He looked at her. He went on looking at her, and she made herself look back, and she thought, "He is going to send me away tonight, and my box will be on the cart by morning, and I will have come here for nothing and seen nothing and understood nothing." But he only said, "The tray is yours now, permanently. Mrs. Thurkell will tell you nothing about it, and you will not ask her, because it is not her business, and it costs her something every time she is asked. Yes, Your Grace. And you have not seen me in this room." "No, Your Grace." He stood. He put on his coat. He took up the cup and carried it himself to the 3rd shelf and set it down, and he did it carefully, with 2 hands, which was not how it was meant to be carried either. At the door he stopped. "Warmed," he said. "Very well. From tomorrow." Then he was gone up the passage with no candle at all, and Damaris stood in the still room until she stopped shaking, which took some considerable time. In the morning, she warmed the cup. She did it the way she had been taught, with water from the kettle, and poured the water away and dried it, and she warmed it a second time at the top of the back stairs because the passage was cold, and then she made the tea and poured. He was not at the window. He was standing at the end of the long table with his hands behind his back, at the empty place, waiting, and when she came in he moved 1 step aside to let her set it down, and neither of them said anything about it at all. "Thank you," he said. At 8:30 it was full and cold and skinned over, exactly as it had been every other morning of that winter, but it had been warmed, and he had known that it was warmed. And she found, going down the back stairs with the tray in her hands, that she had begun to cry, and that she had no idea in the world why. The child came into it 2 days later, and she came into it the way she came into everything, which was sideways, and at speed and without being asked. Damaris was carrying linen across the upper landing when a door banged, and something small and furious came out of it, and collided with her, and the linen went everywhere. The something small was a girl of about 10, in a good dress that had been badly treated. She had a hard face and untidy dark hair, and she looked at the linen on the floor, and then at Damaris and said, "Well, pick it up." The girl stood over her and watched. "You are the new one," she said. "The one who does the tea. I am. Bess did it before, and she was stupid. Are you stupid?" "Probably," said Damaris, "at some things." The girl seemed thrown by this. She had clearly been braced for something else. "I am Ottilie," she said. "I know. Everybody knows. It does not signify." She kicked at a pillowcase that had not yet been gathered. "Nobody in this house will say a single true thing to me. Do you know that? Not one. They say hush, and they say not now, and they say when you are older. I am 10. I shall be old when everything interesting has already happened." Damaris folded the last of the linen and stood up with it. "Then I will make you an offer," she said. Ottilie narrowed her eyes. "I will not tell you anything." "I do not know," said Damaris. "But I will not tell you a lie either, and I will not say when you are older. If I cannot answer you, I shall say I cannot answer you, and you will know it is the truth." Ottilie thought about this with her whole face. "That is a poor offer," she said. "It is the only one you have had." "Yes," said Ottilie, "it is." After that she was there constantly, which Damaris had not intended, and did not entirely mind. She appeared in passages. She sat on the stairs outside the linen room with her chin on her knees. She was rude to everybody in the house except Damaris, and she was rude to Damaris too, but it was a different sort of rudeness. the sort that is testing whether it will be sent away. She had wrecked a schoolroom once. Not recently, and she brought it up herself at the end of the first week, watching sideways to see what would be done with it. I threw the globe at the wall, she said. It came apart and the stand bent and it cost £11. Why? She said my father would have wanted me to be good. Damaris went on. Folding that was a stupid thing for her to say, she said, and I expect she knew it the moment it was out of her. But you are 10 years old, and there will come a day when breaking the furniture is not available to you, and you had better find out now what you mean to do instead. Ottilie considered this for 2 days. Then she came back and asked what Damaris had done instead. Nothing, said Damaris, for 4 years. And I do not recommend that either. Her father had been the Duke's younger brother. He had died when she was 4. Her mother had died when she was born. There was nobody else at all, and there was a great deal of money set aside for her, and there was a governess who lasted 11 weeks and then another who lasted 5, and the current one had been in the house since Easter and had learned to leave the schoolroom door open so that she could hear where Ottilie had gone. The Duke saw her at 11 in the morning and at 6 in the evening. Ottilie counted these appointments the way a prisoner counts light. She could tell you to the minute how long the ones in June had run and the ones in July, and she had noticed that they had been getting shorter since the autumn, and she had not told anybody that. And she told Damaris in the second week in a completely flat voice as though it were a fact about the weather. She said things nobody else would say. That was her use, and Damaris was not proud of thinking of it that way. But it was true. On a Sunday in the middle of December, sitting on the back stairs with a stolen apple, Ottilie said, "Do you know about the cup?" Damaris kept her hands moving on the work in her lap. "I know that he does not drink it. It is for my father," said Ottilie. Damaris looked up. The girl was not being sly. Her face was perfectly open, and she said it the way children say the things they have decided are true because nobody would correct them. "He died in the spring," she said, "before ever my uncle was Duke, and my uncle was very fond of him, and now he has 1 cup of tea every morning and does not drink it, because you cannot drink tea with somebody who is dead. That is why it is only ever 1. If it were his own, he would drink it. It is not his own." She bit the apple, "and he never says her name or his name or anybody's name," she said. "That is how I know it is somebody. If it were only a habit, there would be a reason for it, and reasons get told. Nobody protects a habit." Damaris sat with the needle stopped in the cloth. The dates would not sit down together. Damaris had counted them out on her fingers in the dark of the linen room more than once, and there was a year in them that would not go anywhere, and she could not say so, because to say so, she would have had to say why she was counting. She said, "Did somebody tell you that?" "No," said Ottilie. "Then how do you know it?" The girl chewed for a while. "I do not," she said at last in a much smaller voice. "I made it up when I was 8, and I have believed it ever since because I liked it." She turned the apple round and round. "I would rather it were my father than nobody. If it is nobody, then he simply does it. And that is worse, because that is a mad thing to do. And he is not mad. He is the only one who is not." Damaris put down the sewing. Something moved at the end of the passage, and she turned her head. The Duke was standing at the far end of the upper corridor, with a folded paper in his hand. He was in the shadow between 2 windows, and she did not know how long he had been there. He was not looking at Damaris. He was looking at the top of his niece's head, at the untidy dark hair and the stolen apple, and the 2 of them sitting on a back staircase where neither of them was supposed to be. He did not come forward. He did not speak. After a moment he turned and went back the way he had come, and his footsteps were quite deliberate and quite loud on the boards, so that they would hear him going. Ottilie did not look up. "He does that," she said. "He goes away noisily. So you will know he was not spying. It is the politest thing anybody in this house does, and nobody has ever noticed it but me." She finished the apple, down to the core. Damaris thought about the still room, and the shirt sleeves, and the two hands carrying a common brown cup back to a shelf. She thought about a box on a cart at 4 o'clock. "There is a rule in this house about that," she said. "There is a rule in this house about everything," said Ottilie. "That is what a house is. You could ask him," she said. "Ask him what?" "About the cup." Ottilie stood and brushed off her skirt and looked down at Damaris with the flat certainty of a person who has never once had to carry a box out to a cart. "Nobody ever asks him," she said. "Everybody in this house has been not asking him for 4 years. Have you never thought that he might be waiting?" She did not ask him that week or the week after. What she did instead was ask Mrs. Thurkell on the last night of the year, when the housekeeper was totting the storebook by one candle and the rest of the house was asleep. Mrs. Thurkell put down her pen. "I told you what would happen to you. You told me what happened to Peg." Peg asked him, "You are asking me." The housekeeper rubbed her eyes with the heel of her hand, and for a moment she looked like what she was, a tired woman of 60 in a cold room at midnight. "I asked him once," she said, "in my first year, when I did not know better. And," he said, "tell them it is a debt, a debt. That is every word I have had on the subject in 3 years, and I have not wanted more, because a debt is an estate matter, and estate matters are not mine." Mrs. Thurkell picked up her pen. "I advise you to want no more either. Some of us go on only because there are doors we have agreed not to open." Damaris went up and lay in the dark next to Bess and did not sleep. A debt. Her father had been put out of his house over £340 he had not taken. 4 years later, a man in that house was still paying something at 7:15 and calling it by the same word. She got up at 4:30. She lit the fire. She warmed the cup twice as she always did now. She carried the tray up and knocked once and went in. He was at the empty place waiting, with his hands behind his back. She set it down. She poured. The steam came up between them. "Thank you," he said. Damaris did not go. She stood with the empty tray against her apron, and after a moment he noticed, the way a man notices a change in a sound he has stopped hearing. "You may go," he said. "I know, Your Grace." He turned round. She had wondered whether she would be frightened. She was not. She was so far past frightened that it had come round again into something almost restful. "Why do you order it," she said, "if you never drink it?" The fire moved in the grate. He looked at her for a long time. He did not look angry. That was the thing she had not expected and could not prepare for. He looked like a man who has been holding a door shut with his shoulder for 4 years and has just felt it move. Then he pulled out the chair at the empty place, and he did not sit in it, and he turned it a little to face the room, and he said, "Sit down. Your Grace, I cannot." "Sit down, Damaris." She sat in the chair nobody sat in, and he stood, and that was how it was for the whole of it. "It belonged to a man named Elias Merrow," he said. She had known it. She had known it for a month. It went through her like cold water all the same. "He was steward here 11 years, to my father, and then for 3 months to me. He was the best keeper of a book I have ever seen, and I have never told anybody that either. At Michaelmas 4 years ago, £340 of rents did not reach the bank at Ledwich, and I was told by my own man of business that the book showed his hand on it, and I sent for him at 7:15 on the Thursday morning." He stopped. "I had been Duke 3 months, he said. My father was 6 months dead and my brother 18 months dead, and I was 29, and there were 400 people on this land waiting to see what sort of man had come into it. I was told that a duke who hesitates over a thief will be robbed for 30 years. "Who told you that?" said Damaris. He did not answer. "He kept me 4 hours, he said instead. That is what he would tell you. It is not true. I kept him 4 hours. He stood in the middle of the library, and I sat at the desk, and I did not ask him one single question. 4 hours, and not one question. He asked to take the books away and bring them back in the morning, and I said no, because I could hear myself being firm, and I liked the sound of it. 14 months later, the money was found, he said. All of it. My understeward had been paying it into Ledwich, under a name that was not his, for 2 years, and it came out over something else entirely, and nothing to do with me. Elias Marrow never took a penny in his life. I had dismissed an honest man without a character, in order to look like a duke. Damaris sat very still and held her own hands together in her lap so that they would not do anything. "Where is he?" she said. "I do not know. You did not look." "I looked for 2 years," said the Duke of Holloway. "Every agency in 3 counties. A notice in 2 papers. I went myself to Ledwich and to Marchford and to Bath and asked at every place on this earth where a steward might apply for work. There is no Marrow anywhere I could find, and I have never known whether that is because he did not wish to be found or because I did not deserve to find him, and I have decided it does not signify because the 2 amount to the same thing. And the cup." He looked at the cup. "I went to Wren's Gate on the Sunday after they left," he said. "I do not know what I meant to do there. The house was empty. The grate was cold, and the floor had been swept, which I have never got over, that a woman put out of her home on 2 days' notice swept the floor before she went. And on the sill of the office window there was a brown cup upside down on a folded cloth, washed and left. He was quiet. I took it," he said. "And then for a year I did not know what to do with it, and I discovered that a man may be sorry in private for as long as he likes, and it costs him precisely nothing, so I made it cost something. Every morning at the hour I sent for him, I ordered the one thing in this house I am not permitted to have, and I look at it until it is cold, and then it is taken away." Damaris said, "And that is a debt. It does not pay anybody." "No," he said, "it is not a payment. It is an account kept open by a man who cannot find the person he owes." The clock struck the half-hour. "Peg asked me something much smaller than this," he said. "She asked whether I should like a fresh cup, and I put her out of my house before dinner, and I knew within the hour what I had done, and I did not undo it, because it seems I have got into the habit of not undoing things. She had £4 a year, and no people. I have never found her either." He turned and looked at Damaris directly. "Why did you ask?" Damaris stood up out of the chair. "Because nobody had," she said. "In 4 years." He accepted it. She saw that he had wanted some other answer, and that he was not going to say what. "Go down," he said. "You will be missed." She took the tray and went out and shut the door behind her, and then she stood in the cold passage with her back against the wall and her hand across her mouth so that no sound at all would get out of her. An honest man. She had been 5 months in that house, waiting for one living person to say it. After that he talked to her. Not much. Not about the cup. Never once about the cup. Well, but the 90 seconds between the pouring and the going stopped being empty, and by the middle of January they had become the fixed point of her whole day. He would say that the frost had taken the pump after all, and she would say that Hollis had lagged it in November, and lagged it badly, and he would say that he was not surprised. He would say that he had begun a book and could not tell whether it was good or whether he was simply cold. He would ask what they were eating below stairs and be told, and once he said that he had not eaten a suet pudding in 11 years and that he thought about it more than was dignified. One morning in January he said, "Do you read? When there is light, your grace, and something to read. There is a room downstairs with 4,000 books in it that nobody has opened since my father died," he said, and then he stopped, because they had both understood at the same moment that there was no possible way for him to finish the sentence that would not put her out of her place. And he looked at the window and said that the frost was going, and Damaris said, "Yes, your grace," and went down. She thought about that all day. She was still thinking about it in March. He asked her about Ottilie almost every day, and never directly. He would say, "Is she up?" He would say, "Did she eat anything?" He would say, "Has she been on the back stairs?" in a tone that was meant to be disapproving and was not, and Damaris would say, "Yes, Your Grace." And he would say, "Ah," and look at the window. Once he called her Miss Rowe. It went through her like a splinter. He meant it kindly. That was the whole trouble with it. He said it as a man says a name when he has decided to be careful with a person. And she stood there holding a tray and being called by her mother's name in her father's house by the man who had ruined them both. And she said, "Yes, Your Grace," and went down the back stairs and stood in the yard in the cold until she could breathe properly again. She did not tell him. Every morning she did not tell him. And every morning the not telling weighed a little more. Because a thing you have not said in 1 week is a silence, and a thing you have not said in 8 is a lie. She could have gone. She thought about that afterwards a great deal. She had 5 months' wages and a place she could have had anywhere, and she stayed, and she knew quite well why she stayed and would not put it into words even inside her own head. She had come to look at his face. She had looked at it every morning since November. She still could not have told anybody what she saw in it. She only knew that she wanted to see it again at 7:15 tomorrow, and that this was the most dangerous thing that had ever happened to her. Lady Aveline Cremont came to Halloway Court on the 10th of February and stayed 11 days. She was the Duke's aunt, his mother's elder sister, and she had been widowed at 30 and had spent the 40 years since running the reputations of 4 families with the steady competence of a woman running a bank. Mrs. Thirkell went pale when the letter came. The plate was got out. 2 more girls were taken on from the village for the duration. She was in the house 3 days before she sent for anybody. She walked through the rooms in the mornings with Mrs. Thirkell a pace behind her and looked at things without touching them. She had the linen counted. She had the cellar book brought up. She asked the gardener what he had spent in July and then made him say it again. Audley disappeared entirely for the whole 11 days, in the manner of a cat, and was found on the second night asleep in the linen room under a shelf, and would say nothing at all about why, and did not have to. On the 4th day Damaris was sent for. She was received in the small library, which was cold, and Lady Aveline did not stand and did not offer her a chair, and looked at her for some time over a pair of spectacles she did not need. "You are the one who takes the tray up." "I am, my lady." "And the one who has the care of my great niece, which is not what you were engaged for." "I was not engaged for it. It happened." "Things do," said Lady Aveline. "Sit down." Damaris sat. Lady Aveline did not begin with what she had come to say. She began somewhere else entirely, which Damaris understood afterwards to have been the point. "Where are your people?" "Ledwich, my lady. What is your father?" "He was a clerk." "Was. He is ill." "And your mother?" "She sews." "Somebody taught you," said Lady Aveline. "Not much and not well, but somebody sat you down and did it. Girls out of Ledwich do not put was and is in the right places, and they do not stand as you are standing. And they do not look at me. You are about to tell me you had a Sunday school." "I had a Sunday school, my lady." "Yes," said Lady Aveline pleasantly. "I am sure that you had. I am going to be playing with you, and you will find that I am not unkind, only quick. My nephew has spoken to a servant every morning for 6 weeks. In this house that is not a small thing. It is the only thing, and every soul under this roof has noticed it, and 3 of them have written to relations about it, and 1 of those relations has written to me. My nephew is not a fool. He is something worse, which is a decent man with an unpaid conscience, and such men are the easiest creatures in England to attach." Damaris said nothing. "I am not going to tell you that you are beneath him," said Lady Aveline. "You know it, I know it, and saying it aloud only makes the young romantic. I am going to tell you 3 things that are simply true, and then I am going to make you an offer." The fire had not been lit. Damaris could see her own breath a little. "The first is that if he married you, he would be a joke in 3 counties for 30 years, and he would bear it, because he is stubborn, and he would tell you it did not signify. The second is that Audley would bear it too, and she would not be asked whether she wished to. That child has no father and no mother, and one card to play in 8 years' time, and you would spend it for her before she was old enough to know it had been hers. Damaris looked at her hands. And the third, said Lady Eveline, is the one I would have you attend to. She took her spectacles off. He does not love you, she said. He is in the 4th year of a penance, and you are the nearest object to hand. You have not been courted, you have been absolved. Whatever he feels when he looks at you, it is not you he is looking at. And if you have any sense at all, you will have suspected that yourself at 4 in the morning and put it away again. She let it sit. I have watched him for 4 days, she said. He does not send for you. He waits for you. There is the whole of my objection in one word. A man who stands at a table at 7:15, waiting for a housemaid to come up his own back stairs, is not in command of himself, and a duke who is not in command of himself is a danger to 400 people who never asked him to be interesting. The clock ticked. That is very well argued, my lady, said Damaris. It is not argued. It is observed. Now, the offer. Lady Eveline folded the spectacles. £40. A character in my own hand and a place in Bath, with a family I know, and you go on Thursday, and you write him nothing. And if I do not, then I shall tell him who you are. Miss Marrow. The room was very quiet. Damaris found that she was not surprised, and that some part of her had been waiting 11 days for exactly this, and that the waiting had been worse. I had inquiries made the day I arrived, said Lady Eveline. I have them made about everybody. My nephew has spent 4 years looking for a steward, in agencies and in gentlemen's houses, which is where a steward would be. I began with a housemaid instead. Your letter of engagement is in the housekeeper's book with a lane on the back of it, and it took a clerk in Ledwich 2 days from there and cost me rather less than this gown. Elias Marrow, wife Sabra, daughter Damaris. 2 rooms over at Chandler's in Cotter Lane. Your mother's name before she married was Rowe. Yes, my lady, you came into this house under a false name to look at the man who ruined your father. Yes. And you have stayed 6 months and said nothing. Yes. Lady Eveline sat back. Then you will understand, she said, that whatever else is true, you are not in a position to be righteous with me. No, said Damaris. She sat and looked at the cold grate for a moment, and she thought about her father by the window, and about a swept floor and a washed cup, and about 4 hours in a library. Then she said, May I ask you one thing before I go? You may. He told me he was advised, said Damaris. He said he had been told that a duke who hesitates over a thief will be robbed for 30 years. He would not say who told him. He was 29, and his father was 6 months dead, and somebody put those words into him at 7:15 on a Thursday morning. She looked up. Was it you, my lady? Lady Eveline Craymon did not move at all. Her face did not change. But her hand, which had been perfectly loose on the arm of her chair, closed on the wood. And Damaris watched it close, and neither of them said anything for the space of about 4 breaths. That is not your concern, said Lady Eveline. No, said Damaris, it is not. She stood. I will not take your £40, and I will not go to Bath, and I will not have you tell him, because it is not yours to tell, and because you would tell it in a way that would let him off. She was surprised at how quiet her voice was. I am going to tell him myself. Tomorrow, at 7:15, and then it will be his to do as he likes with. And if he puts me out of the house, I shall go without a word, and you may have the satisfaction of it. Sit down, Miss Marrow. No, my lady. I said, sit down, and I said no. Damaris went to the door. Her hand did not shake on it, which she thought afterwards was the single greatest achievement of her life. Thank you for seeing me, she said, and went out. She got as far as the passage by the boot room before her legs went. She sat down on the flagstones with her back against the paneling and her knees up. Audley found her there. Damaris never knew how and always suspected the linen room shelf. The child sat down beside her on the cold stone without being asked and did not say anything for a long while. "Was it about the tea?" she said at last. "I cannot answer you." "Good," said Audley. And she stayed where she was until Damaris got up, which took a quarter of an hour, and then went off deliberately in the other direction so that the two of them should not be seen coming out of that passage together, which was a thing nobody in the world had taught her. At 7:15 the next morning, she carried up the tray with the whole of it ready in her mouth. The room was empty, the fire was lit, and the place was laid, and he was not there. She stood in the doorway and something in her chest went down very slowly, like a bucket into a well. She poured it anyway, and set it at the empty place, and went out. At 8:30, it was cold and full and skinned over. "His Grace went to London at 5, said Mrs. Thirkell, when she came down. "There is no tray until he returns." "When does he return?" He did not say. The cup went back on the third shelf in the still room and stayed there, dry for the first time since November. 2 days, 4 days. On the 6th day, Lady Aveline Cremond went back to her own house without having spoken to Damaris again, and looked straight through her in the hall, which was worse than anything she had said in the library. On the 8th day, a letter came for Damaris, in her mother's hand, and it was 4 lines long. "Your father has asked for you. He has not asked for anything in 4 years. Come if you can be spared." She went to Mrs. Thirkell and asked for leave, and Mrs. Thirkell looked at her for a long moment and gave it, and did not ask a single question. And Damaris understood that she had been given a great kindness by a woman who had learned in that house never to name one. She left on the 9th morning without writing anything down, because there was nothing she could have written that would not have been either a lie or the whole of it. Cotter Lane in February smelled of tallow and wet coal. The stairs came up steep off the passage beside the chandler's shop, and the door at the top had been painted green a long time ago by somebody else. Her mother opened it. She had got older in 6 months in the particular way that women do when they have been managing. "He is at the window," she said. "He is at the window. Damaris, he is always at the window. But he asked for you on Tuesday, and he said your whole name." The room was small and very clean. Her father sat in the chair by the window with a blanket over his knees, and he was thinner, and his hair had gone from gray to white at the temples in the way it does. He turned his head when she came in, which he did not always do. "Damaris," he said. She knelt down by the chair and took his hand, and it was cold and light as a bundle of sticks, and she put her forehead down on it and did not say anything for a while. "Where have you been?" said Elias Merrow. Her mother made a small sound behind her. Damaris lifted her head. She had thought about how she would do this on 22 miles of a carrier's cart, and every version she had built had fallen apart, and in the end, she did it the only way that was left, which was straight through the middle.
"I have been at Holloway Court,"
she said. "Since August, under Mother's name. I went there to look at him, and I stayed to carry his tray, and he keeps your cup on a shelf in the still room, where nothing else is allowed to stand, and he has ordered 1 cup of tea every morning at 7:15 for 4 years, and he has never once drunk it, and he does not know who I am, and I love him, and I came here to tell you, before I told him." Her mother sat down on the edge of the bed very suddenly. Her father did not move. He looked out of the window at the lane and the wet slates opposite, and the clock on the shelf ticked, and Damaris knelt there on the boards and waited. And she thought, "This is the worst hour of my life, and I have brought it here myself, in my own 2 hands. Then Elias Merrow said, "4 years, yes. Every morning, said Damaris. "I have carried it up since November. I warmed the cup twice because the passage is cold." Her father closed his eyes. He did not open them again for a long time. Damaris looked at her mother, and her mother shook her head very slightly, meaning, wait. And so they waited, the 3 of them, in a small, clean room over a chandler's shop, with the lamp going and the rain starting. When he did speak, it was not to her. "Sabra," he said. "Yes, Elias." "Put the kettle on the fire." Her mother got up and put the kettle on the fire, and did not ask him why, and did not look at Damaris while she did it, and Damaris understood, kneeling on the boards, that her mother had been waiting 4 years for a sentence that began with her own name. They knocked at 9 o'clock that night. Damaris was at the top of the stairs with a candle before her mother had got out of her chair, and she opened the green door, and the Duke of Holloway was standing on the landing with his hat in his hand. He had come on horseback, and he had come fast. There was mud to the knee of him, and his coat was wet through at the shoulders, and he had not shaved, and he looked as though he had not slept since London, and he looked at her in the candlelight and said nothing at all for a moment. "I went to the agencies again," he said, "as I do, and this time I asked them something I had never thought to ask in 4 years, which was whether Merrow's wife had gone by another name. A girl told me once that her mother taught her to warm a cup before pouring, and I have not been able to put it down since, because there is one man in England who taught anybody that, and I dismissed him without a character on a Thursday morning." Damaris held on to the doorframe. "I came back on Monday," he said, "and my house was wrong, and Mrs. Thurkell told me where you had gone, and I have ridden here from Holloway, and I want you to understand before I come any further up these stairs that I am not here to ask you for anything. I have no right to want anything from this family. Not one thing. Not tonight, and not ever." "Then why have you come?" said Damaris. "To stand in front of him," said the Duke, "and let him say whatever he likes to me. That is all. That is the whole of it." She stood aside. He had to stoop for the doorway. He came into that small, clean room with his hat in his hands, a duke in 2 rented rooms in Cotter Lane, and Sabra Merrow stood up out of the chair and did not curtsy, and he did not seem to notice, and he went and stood in front of the window where her father sat. Elias Merrow looked up at him. "Nobody said anything at all." "I am not going to explain myself," said the Duke at last. "There is nothing to explain. I did it out of vanity. I knew within the year that I had done it, and I have not been able to find you to say so. I have brought a paper with me. It is a notice for the county papers and for the agencies, over my name and my seal, and it says what happened and who did it, and that Elias Merrow was innocent of every part of it. It goes out, whether you speak to me or not. It should have gone out 3 years ago, and I did not do it, because I could not bear the county to know what I was." He put the folded paper on the sill. "That is not for you," he said. "That is for me. I am aware of the difference." Her father looked at the paper. He did not touch it. Then he said, in a voice that had not been used much in 4 years, "You kept my cup, yes. Why?" "Because I could not think of anything else to do," said the Duke of Holloway, "and I have had 4 years to think of something better, and I never have." Damaris found that she had come to stand at her father's shoulder, without deciding to. She said, "I want to say something." They both looked at her. "I came into your house to see whether you had thought about it," she said. "That was all I wanted. I used to lie awake and think, if he thought about it even once, even for a minute, I could bear the rest. And I have watched you think about nothing else every morning for 4 months, and I want you to hear me say that it has not given my father back 1 single hour, not one. It has not paid a doctor, and it has not answered a letter, and it has not put a name in a newspaper until tonight. He did not defend himself. He stood and took it. So I do not want you to be sorry anymore," said Damaris. "You are very good at. Sorry? You have made a whole life out of it, and it is a small, tidy life, and it costs you exactly 1 cup of tea a day." "I want you to be finished." Her voice went at last on the last word, and she let it. The rain came on the window. "I do not know how," he said. "I know you do not." Then he said, still looking at her, and quite steadily, I said I would not ask you for anything, and I am keeping to it. But you should know what I would ask for, if I had the right, so that you are not deceived about what is standing in your father's room." "Say it then," said Elias Merrill. The Duke of Holloway looked at him. "I would ask her to marry me," he said. "Not for the child, though she is a different creature since December, and everybody in that house knows why. Not to settle anything with you, because nothing between you and me can be settled by giving your daughter a title, and I would not insult you by pretending otherwise. I would ask, because I have spent 4 years unable to lift a cup. And she came up my back stairs in November and told me I had been doing it wrong, and it is the first thing anybody has said to me in this life that made me want to be alive in the morning." Nobody spoke. Then Damaris said, "Ask me." "I have no right. I did not ask about your rights," she said. "I have been in your house 6 months under a false name, and I have no rights either." She said yes, and that was all she said. And he did not cross the room, and he did not touch her. He stood where he was in his wet coat with his hat still in his hand, and he looked at her, and he bowed his head very slightly, once, the way a man does when he has been given something he cannot carry. Behind them her mother said, "Well," and could not go on, and went and stood at the fire with her back to the room and her hands over her face. In the morning, at 7:15, Damaris warmed the cup twice, because the room was cold. She made the tea in her mother's brown pot, and poured it and carried it across the boards, and set it down on the sill at her father's elbow, because that was where it went, and had always gone, and she had been 5 years old the first time. Her father did not pick it up. He looked at it. Then he looked at the man standing by the door with his hat in his hands, who had not sat down and had not been asked to. "Drink it, your grace," said Elias Merrill. And the Duke of Holloway came and sat down on a chandler's stair chair in 2 rooms in Cotter Lane and drank a cup of tea, and it took him a long time, and nobody in that room said one word until it was done. They were married in April at Ledwich, in a plain church with a bad roof, by a curate so frightened that his own wife had to talk him steady in the vestry beforehand. There were 14 people. Sabra Merrill cried from the beginning and made no attempt to stop. Mrs. Thurkell came in a bonnet nobody had seen before, and stood at the back and told 2 separate people that she was not crying and that it was the cold. Audley carried nothing and had no part in the service, having refused all offers on the grounds that she was not a decoration, and then sat in the front pew with her hands folded and her back like a poker, and watched every second of it with an expression of ferocious attention. Elias Merrill gave his daughter away, on his own 2 feet, and walked her the whole length of that church, and it took some time, and nobody hurried him. Hollis came and cried harder than anybody, and was insufferable afterwards about having known from the first. Bess came and brought a cushion cover she had worked herself in wool, in colors that did not agree with one another, or with anything else, and it hung in the small sitting room at Holloway Court for the next 30 years. The chandler shut up his shop for the afternoon and stood out in the lane in his apron to watch them come out, and would not be thanked for it, and told everybody in Ledwich for a fortnight afterwards that he had always said there was something about that family. Lady Aveline Craymon did not come. She wrote, 4 days afterwards, 1 sheet, to the Duchess of Holloway. Damaris read it standing up in the hall. "Madam, I said several things to you in the small library, and I withdraw none of them. 3 of them were true when I said them and remain true, and you will find within 2 years that I was right about the county, and I shall not say so when it happens. I was wrong about the 4th thing. I do not know how I came to be wrong about it, as I am not often. You will oblige me by receiving me in June. She came in June. She was never warm, and she never once mentioned the letter. She sent a christening cup in the 2nd year. 2. It was silver and very plain, and there was no note with it at all. Damaris put it on the 3rd shelf in the still room, where nothing else had ever been allowed to stand, and left it there for a week, and then laughed at herself in the dark one night, and got up and went down and brought it out and used it. But when the Countess of Marney said something clever about the new Duchess in a drawing room in London that autumn, in front of 9 people, Lady Aveline Cramen put down her cup and asked her to repeat it, and then asked her to repeat it again, and then sat in silence and looked at her until she left the house. She never referred to it. Everybody in that room understood. And so within a week did everybody else. The notice went into 3 papers over the Duke's own name and seal. It was not a graceful document. It said what had been done, and by whom, and to whom, and it did not soften any part of it. And men who had known Elias Marrow for 20 years wrote to him from 4 counties. He read them all, and he answered them all, in the small, even hand, and it took him until Christmas. 2 of the men who wrote had refused him a place in the first year. He answered those 2 exactly as he answered the others, and Damaris thought it was the hardest thing she had ever watched a person do, and her father did not appear to have noticed that it was difficult. He would not take the stewardship back. He was offered it before the wedding and refused it in 11 words, which were, "I am obliged to you, and I will not be your steward." But he took the tithe map, which had been wrong since before the old Duke's time, and he sat down to it in September at Wren's Gate with a new pen, and it occupied him for 2 years, and he did not sit by a window again. It was her mother who told her the rest, in October, in the kitchen at Wren's Gate, with the door shut. Alias had asked her to. "There is a thing your father wants you to know," said Sabre Marrow, "and he will not manage it himself, and he has asked me to do it, and I have put it off for a fortnight." Damaris put down what she was holding. "On the Thursday," said her mother, "at the great house, when he came out of that library after the 4 hours. Yes, he has told me twice in his life, and never anybody else." She sat down. He went to the door, and he had his books under his arm, and he turned round in the doorway, and the young Duke was still sitting at the desk, not looking at him. "And your father said to him, 'You have had 4 hours of a man's life in your hands this morning, and you have spent them looking out of a window. I hope you will remember what time it was.'" Damaris stood very still. "And his Grace said, 'What time was it?' And your father said, 7:15. The kitchen clock went on. "He did not tell it to you to be pitied," said her mother. "He wants that understood. He has been 4 years getting to it. He said it to hurt him, Damaris, and he meant it, and he was right to be angry, and he was not right to say it, and he has known since the day you came home in February that a man has been keeping that hour like a fast in a locked room, and it has been on him ever since worse than the 4 years were." Her mother took her hand. "He says to tell your husband that the sentence was passed at a doorway by a man in a temper who had lost his house, and that it was not lawful, and that it is served." Damaris did not cry in the kitchen. She waited until she was in the beach walk halfway back to the great house, and then she stopped and put her hand on a tree and cried until she had finished, and then she washed her face in the water butt at the stable end, and went in and told him, that evening by the fire, all of it word for word. He did not say anything for a long time. Then he said, 4 years, and I never once considered that he might have been sorry too. "No," said Damaris, "I have been keeping an account against myself in a language he did not know I could read." "Yes," he looked into the fire. "Then I have been ridiculous," he said. "You have been a man who came into a great deal at 29, said Damaris, and did his best with it. Audley was another matter and took longer, because Audley took everything longer and gave no notice when it happened. It came in November, on the back stairs where everything with her did. She was 11 by then and had been given a pony and a fencing master, and at her own request no new governess at all, and she was reading Damaris's household book over her shoulder and criticizing the spelling. She had also, in September, without any announcement whatever, begun to call her uncle by his Christian name to his face at the breakfast table. He had gone the color of a beetroot and said nothing at all, and it had stuck, and by Christmas nobody could remember it having been otherwise. Damaris said something about a thing she would explain another time. "You may say when I am older," said Ottilie without looking up, "if you like. I have decided I do not mind it from you." Damaris kept her eyes on the page, and her voice entirely ordinary, and said, "Thank you," and turned the leaf. And that was the whole of it, and neither of them ever mentioned it again as long as they lived. The brown cup came out of the still room in the spring. Nobody made an occasion of it. Damaris simply took it down off the third shelf one morning in March and carried it to the scullery and washed it in the pail with everything else and put it away in the ordinary cupboard with the ordinary china, and it got a second chip on the rim that summer from a kitchen girl who was never told and never knew. The place at the end of the long table went on being laid. It was laid for Ottilie, who ate her breakfast there every morning at 7:15, with her boots on the rail and her hair not done, and was told about the boots, and did not stop. Sometimes there were 3 at that table, and sometimes 4. In the second year there were 5, because Damaris was brought to bed of a son in the March, and he was christened Ilias in the parish church at Holloway, with half the county craning to see, and his grandfather held him at the font with both hands, very carefully the way a man holds a thing that has been broken once and mended. And the tea came up at the same hour it had always come up, in the same brown cup, warmed twice, because the back passage at Holloway Court was cold and always would be. It was carried by whoever happened to be carrying it. It was set down. It was drunk while it was hot, and the cup went down empty, and there was nothing whatever remarkable about any part of it, which was, in the end, the entire and only thing that either of them had ever wanted.